Oops, sorry. This session will cover the implications of COVID-19 on mental health of Black youth and their way of navigating a post-pandemic world that has affected the way that we think, speak, and interact and take care of ourselves. So let's show some love to Michelle, send some hearts, and I'll let Michelle take it away.
Oh, well, thank you guys so much for having me. I am so appreciative to the Africa Center. I'm living my Ice Spice fantasy, I thought, for spring. So that's where this came from. So thanks for that. I just wanted to say thanks again to the Africa Center for allowing me to talk today. As a registered provisional psychologist, I like talking about mental health, but I'm really passionate about talking about Black mental health. And so part of what I do in my practice is making sure that I talk about Black mental health and catering to Black and minority populations and just trying to normalize that therapy is for everyone. So thanks again for letting me talk today about COVID-19 and the impact on Black mental health and Black youth mental health. I will kind of just go through everything and then I think just leave some time for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions or anything that come up afterwards, if that's okay. So one of the things that when we talk about mental health is kind of giving a sense of how did we get here? This didn't just form overnight. This is something that has shaped our lives for hundreds of years. And so what we're talking about, of course, is racism. And that's the big lie that started all of what we're experiencing now in 2023. And the lie that we're talking about is that there are biological differences between ethnic groups. So sometimes we call that the races. There's only one race, the human race. So I try to be mindful of the language that we use and that we are all the same thing. Our ethnic group, we are still humans. So changing our language around races, it doesn't exist. It was made up. And that within these different races or ethnic groups, that our skin color was a determination of our abilities and even our determination of the future, what we could or couldn't do, where we were and were not allowed to be. And so part of what we're experiencing today as Black people is just the implications of that big lie, how it shaped our world, and how in 2023, we're still navigating those challenges. So in regards to mental health, in general, Black people experience higher rates of mental illness when we can compare to our white peers. So recently, the United Nations, they have a committee on racial discrimination, and I believe the United States as well are also advocating for declaring racism a public health emergency, that the bias and the implications on health that have been shown through numerous studies is enough to warrant that our biases need to be addressed because they are having direct harm on people of color, especially our Black youth. What we see in adults are similar trends to what we see in children, mostly because we're speaking about these systems that shape us over a lifetime, that racism really is a cradle to the grave system. And so our youth are not shielded from that. In fact, the implications and the negative impacts on our mental health start from conception and carry on throughout the lifetime. So studies have pointed out that racial discrimination contributes to the advanced decline of Black bodies. Literally, racism is killing us. Our brains age faster, I think about 10 years faster than our white peers. We experience more health issues like heart disease, cholesterol, diabetes, and then we also experience higher rates of mental illness, so things like depression, anxiety, and that literally can be directed right back to the pressure, the constant mental stress that we're under because of racism. And as racism affects us over a lifetime, children are experiencing a similar trend. So what we're recognizing is that in order to address racism, we have to look at it through a systemic lens, not just on the interpersonal, which is kind of what we typically define racism as, those interpersonal slights, but really it's a system. And it's coming back to a belief that skin color has implications in our abilities, which just isn't true. And that bias is still showing up in how we receive care. So when we talk about systemic bias in mental health, Black youth are still at greater risk of experiencing mental illness, but they are also the least likely group to access services. So what we have are youth, young people that are going through depression, anxiety, experiencing social pressures like food insecurity, domestic violence. Maybe they have adults in their life that are experiencing substance abuse or going through their own mental health challenges, and they're not receiving services. One study that I was reading in preparation for this talk today pointed out that for a number of Black youth, the first time that they experience any kind of mental health intervention is when they when they have involvement with the justice system or in the healthcare system, which then means that we have a whole bunch of youth that are experiencing crisis, that are going through things, and unfortunately they're not getting caught or it's not being recognized until sometimes that they are in so much distress, and then they have to go through the medical system where their mental health system issues can either be minimized or not even addressed. For a lot of youth, school is the biggest place where they are going to experience some of those challenges. Like with adults, most of those racist or those interactions happen in the workplace. So what we see in schools is that children, Black youth, are also experiencing the impacts of racism and those biases in the education system, which are further negatively impacting their mental health. There are studies that point out that school children as young as 4, 5, so entering nursery school, have already internalized negative connotations of race. So what that means is for our Black youth, they have already internalized negative associations about their abilities, who their role models are, who's smart, their ability to think about themselves in a positive light. That's already been impacted negatively before the time they've even entered the school system. There's also studies that point out when Black youth enter the school system, they tend to have poor performance outcomes when they're taught by white peers or by white teachers, meaning that those biases that teachers carry are then reflected on the youth. So implications, there was a study that was done where they did a blind test and they told a teacher that this group was Black and another group was white. And they measured the teachers, how they responded to the class and how they taught. And there were significant differences when they thought that their class was majority white as opposed to when their class was majority Black. There's even been studies where bias has been based on how perceived somebody is writing. So so I think this was in law school where they gave, it was the exact same paper. All they did was change the names. So they used more white sounding names as opposed to Black sounding names, submitted the same papers for these professors to grade. And literally it was only based on who they perceived that student to be. Students that were perceived to have Black sounding names were graded less and at a lower rate than the peers that were perceived to have white sounding names, even though the paper was the same. I believe there was a couple of years ago where a teacher was on a Zoom and she was talking about this, a law professor, and she actually ended up losing her job because she basically said that she could tell who the Black students were based on ways that they wrote. And from that, she could already determine who was going to pass or fail her course, and said this openly on a Zoom meeting. So when we can kind of look at that for our Black youth, they're experiencing those things even in elementary school, nursery school. And so what we also see is that Black youth are experiencing high rates of mental distress at a rate that's higher than their white peers. And part of that too is the adultification bias that Black youth tend to experience. When we talk about adultification bias, what that means is that Black youth tend to be seen as, they're not seen as children, and they are punished more severely when compared with their white peers that might be acting and doing the same thing. A Black youth is seen as more aggressive, especially in Black boys. They're considered more aggressive, more violent, even though a white child could be behaving in the same way. Black girls, their bodies are seen as more mature, so they experience higher rates of sexual related issues, so including sexual assault, sexual violence, because they're not seen as young women, they're seen as adults, and so their bodies are also seen as more mature, and so Black girls are exposed to more sexually advanced things because there is a bias that they are more mature than their biological age actually is. In the United States, there's things like the prison to school pipeline, so where these children are seen as more violent, they're expelled from school, and then they're exposed to the justice system at a very young age, and so then they're not receiving the supports and services, and then they're exposed to the harshness of the justice system, which then also has negative implications on outcomes for Black youth. And with Black youth, some of these issues, a lot of these issues are further complicated when we look at the intersection between gender and sexuality. Black youth that identify as part of the LGBTQ2S community are at an even further higher risk of experiencing mental illness, mental distress, higher rates of depression and suicide, and also exposed to violence at a higher rate than not only white peers that identify as part of minority groups, but as part of Black peers as well. This also includes Black youth that identify as having an intellectual disability. Oftentimes, individuals with intellectual disabilities are exposed to violence, physical abuse, and they're not able to always express that because they might have issues with communication. They might not be able to receive the supports in the classroom that they might receive if they were a white peer, and they're also exposed to instances of bullying, and then those are further harm when those issues in the school system are ignored and are minimized by school professionals and administrators. So those are just the general kind of issues that impact Black youth in general. When we look at COVID-19, one of the things that we saw, the issues that were affecting adults were then downloaded to the children. So one of the things in general for Black people during the COVID-19 pandemic, experiencing higher rates of unemployment, income and food insecurity, increased social isolation. There was higher risk and worry about the impact of COVID-19. There were many studies that pointed out that Black people were more likely to die if they contracted COVID-19. There were greater health implications based on, because they're already exposed because of the high risk of their health. COVID-19 further impacted that. So compounding, having health conditions on top of a very, very contagious, very serious disease meant that more Black people were dying of COVID. Mistrust in the medical system then also further complicated that, because Black people were less likely to want to receive the COVID vaccine based on general racism and discrimination in the medical community. It was very unlikely that a group of people were going to trust a vaccine that was supposed to help them when this was coming from the same group that has generally discriminated against them and not validated their experiences. So like with adults, children were also then on the receiving end of a lot of those issues. So if there were issues in the home, let's say for domestic violence, Black youth were then further compounded and exposed to higher rates of violence because of what the adults in their life were experiencing, further then negatively impacting their mental health. with the issues of shutdown, then other outlets like even school or faith groups, extracurricular activities, even being able to socialize with friends were reduced or eliminated, which then further led to Black youth being isolated, stuck in situations where maybe they're exposed to violence and addiction, watching the adults in their lives where their mental health might also be deteriorating, left Black youth feeling very vulnerable and again exposed to higher rates of mental illness and distress, but also then not able to access the supports because their mental health conditions weren't believed. And then they're also sometimes in environments where the adults in their lives might not have the coping skills in order to manage dealing with a pandemic that was difficult and all of the other issues that came from that. Sometimes for some Black youth, the adults in their lives were in high-risk service industry, trying to survive, taxi drivers, working in grocery stores, our frontline service staff. All of that put them at greater risk of contracting COVID, which then could also impact their abilities to feed their families. Carrying those risks around and those stress and worries as adults, it's impossible for youth not to see and experience that. And so if the adults in their lives are struggling, it's very likely that those youth were also struggling as well and not having an outlet to talk about that and having the social outlets that were usually available to them also being withdrawn. Saying all that, though, it wasn't all negative. I promise it wasn't all negative. There were some good things that we did see out of the pandemic. There was a study that actually talked about Black mental health and during the COVID-19 pandemic. And although it talked about a lot of the things that we talked about, that yes, there were higher rates of mental illness and distress for Black youth. They experienced higher rates of depression, anxiety. Some youth turned to substance abuse, feeling greater use of isolation or feeling social isolation. All of those things were true, but there was also a lot of healthy things that came out of the pandemic. Number one being that there was a greater appreciation for those that were able to spend time with family and friends. So youth really appreciating their family units. They also reported having more awareness about mental health, which is something that we saw overall. More people taking time to address their mental health. COVID-19 allowed people to slow down and those that had the resources to access therapy. There were more people coming into therapy talking about the impact of COVID-19, how it was impacting them personally, how they were seeing it impact their youth, and also just the family units in general. And so for Black youth, there was an awareness that, this is something that I can take seriously, and looking more and looking into resources about mental health and mental wellness and physical wellness. There was also the added kind of offshoot of online learning. What we saw in offices is that there was an improvement in mental health because people did not have to experience microaggressions on a daily basis. Those everyday slights, misunderstandings that happen that take a mental toll. It's that thing that we constantly have to be mindful of. When we were forced to work from home, schooling was forced to be online, what we noticed is that for a number of Black adults and youth, that they could take the edge off. It took the edge off a little bit, not having to be exposed to the constant, what is Carol going to say? What's Frank got? What's my teacher going to say? Actually allowed youth to kind of allow them to be themselves, not having to adjust to being in predominantly white spaces, having to address issues of code switching, changing how they speak, how they behave, that it was perfectly fine to be in their jammies and, learn at their own pace and not have that added stress of racism and some of those things being thrown in their daily lives. And that was also a trend that we noticed in adults as well.
Michelle,
I just wanted to say I have to agree with you on that one for sure. It was definitely like so much like calm, and also you're in your own space, you know, you're able to kind of be comfortable in your own skin. I would
Yeah.
have to agree with you on that one for sure.
Yeah, it was huge. Like even like that work-life balance, that wasn't, we saw that for white people in the pandemic. That's not exclusive to us. Being able to spend more time with our families, being able to kind of reprioritize what's important, even being able to evaluate what is happening. What am I going back to in the office or in school? It's given people the opportunity to talk about issues that I think for most of us, we kind of throw our hands up and go, this is life. This is our day to day. And the COVID-19, like this pandemic, has forced us to go, actually, this is important. And we can't go back to our the way things were. We can't go back to not talking about these things. That having that kind of moment, it was like, oh, I can't go back to this. And same thing with youth, like, oh, this is different. Being able to validate and acknowledge our experiences when we're so used to go, 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 go. And in a society that validates doing something. Oftentimes when I talk with parents that are bringing their youth in, the biggest complaint, they're not doing anything. And I counter that with, that sounds like they're doing wonderful things. What do you mean? They get to sit and they're thinking and they're taking care of their mental health. They're not worried and they're just sitting and chilling. That's a wonderful thing. And that learning to stop, slow down, that this go, 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 who is it serving, has been a really big question. And I think that moving forward, it's been something that we've kind of gotten a taste of, and now we're not letting go. And so moving forward, like the biggest question as a therapist is, well, what do we do? How do we take these learnings and apply them? And the one thing that I talk about in my practice is normalizing talking about mental health. That we need to create spaces like this where we talk about what we experience in a non-judgmental and safe way. And that is something that youth need, and it's something that they crave. Oftentimes in therapy, it might be the first time that they've talked about these things, and they're like, yes, I wish the adults in my life would talk to me about this. Especially if a youth is maybe 1, 2, 3, very small minority and predominantly white spaces. As adults, being comfortable with allowing that youth to talk about what is that like for them, being curious, validating their experiences. Oftentimes, we know something's wrong or there's something off, but we might not have the language to fully kind of explain it. So oftentimes we feel it in our bodies. People come into therapy and they're like, something's off. I know it. And then we can say a word like microaggression and they're like, yeah, that's it. But especially for youth, they're experiencing this and they don't have that language. So as adults, being comfortable with having hard conversations, talking about racism, talking about what that feels like for them is actually going to improve mental health. Oftentimes a Black youth can feel really isolated. They might have a couple of friends that look like them. Sometimes they don't, depending on where they live. And so not having others that can validate, acknowledge what that's like for them can be very isolating. And what then happens is these youth internalize, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me, which then also continues to perpetuate those biases and that idea around white supremacy, where the more that we can normalize talking about mental health, we can say, it's not you. There are factors that are impacting you and that we need to validate those experiences. For the adults in youth lives, parents, guardians, even aunties, uncles, family members, we are the biggest role models. It might not feel like it. It can feel like TikTok runs everything. But I'm telling you, you as adults are the biggest role models and the biggest influence for youth. When youth see the adults in their life practicing mental wellness, I think Odeon was talking about that, that they are more likely to follow suit. Children learn how to cope, how they get through life through the adults in their lives. And so the more examples they have of adults going to therapy, talking about wellness, meditation, journaling, all of those good things that we talk about, they are more likely to use those coping tools. And there is so much research that point out that those coping strategies are what are going to help reduce some of these negative health implications. Meditating for 15 minutes a day has been proven to reduce blood pressure. So imagine what that does over the lifetime. And if we can expose youth to practices like this over the lifetime, then that means then that the long negative health implications are less likely to happen, because now we got youth that are meditating and dealing with their stress, which then means that they're not carrying that into adulthood, which then improves their lifespan and just their overall health, implications. For community organizations and for those, I'm not sure where everyone is, but for the professionals, the people that are part of community organizations, representation matters. We need to be visible. We need to be the voice that says that therapy is for everybody. Getting help is for everyone. I can't tell you how many times in my practice, sometimes I have a new person of color, they're coming in, they're nervous, they're like, I've never been here before, I don't even know why I'm here, I thought this is for white people. And we have a good laugh, and no, this is a human experience. Mental health is nothing to do with skin color, it has to do with being human, and we are all human. And so the more that we can let go of that lie, that there are differences between us based on our skin color, it's not true. COVID-19 impacted us because we're human. And so the solution for that is not limited to skin color. And so mental health is human health, and that's what we all are. And so the more that advocates can talk about that, having more Black therapists, connecting with community organizations, finding and creating those spaces for Black youth to talk and engage and fellowship with others is what's going to help, because then they also then can advocate for what they need moving forward. Part of that too is having those wellness advocates, setting up positive role models. TikTok, not that I'm against TikTok, it's just the popular one. Instagram, being curious, who are your youth talking to? What are they saying? Being curious about who are those messages? Why is this person important in this youth's life? What are they saying? What are those messages that our Black youth are seeing that maybe contribute to negative stereotypes? Talking about the stigma. Who are those people that advocate for body positivity, mental health advocacy? Those are the voices that should be amplified. And the other thing that, again, it's not our work, but it is our work, speaking up and speaking out about inequality when we can. As much as we say that it is not our work to dismantle this ugliness that is white supremacy, it won't get done unless we say things. And that is just the unfortunate nature of humans and where we're at. And so part of supporting Black youth is by speaking out and speaking up of the issues that impact them. Talking about education, mental health, the healthcare system in general. I just read an article, and they did a study in Alberta, where I am based, where 60% of the doctors that were surveyed had anti-Indigenous bias. So we can download those biases where anti-Indigenous with anti-Black, LGBTQ issues, Black and trans youth, that those biases are infecting those that are supposed to be caring for us. So the more that we can advocate, speaking out, learning about these things are how those changes are made. It's tiring. One of the things I heard Odion saying, it is okay to take a break. We can't be Xena for everything. We can't take everything on, but it is important work. And it is work that the more that we can intervene earlier for our youth, is going to have better health implications for them. It's going to create healthier families, which then also creates healthier communities. And so that's part of why I do the work that I do. I'm so thankful to be able to partner with organizations like Africa Centre and to be able to talk with people like you today. And so, yeah, and hope that we can continue this conversation and keep going. I could also keep talking, and I would if given the opportunity. So I think I'll close there and just kind of open up if there's any questions or any comments that anybody would like to add.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I know we have some questions in the chat, so I'll kind of read those out. But again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise a hand or pop them in the chat and I'll be able to read them out. One of the questions kind of earlier on was, how do we navigate or challenge this? And I think this was in regards to the hypermasculinity and hyperfeminization and sexualization of our boys and girls in the Black community and how that relates to their mental health. So how do we challenge those stereotypes and notions?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We have to let kids be kids. One of the hardest things is because they are Black youth, we can't erase that. We cannot send our children out into the world without an understanding of what their Blackness and what the perception of that is and how it's impacting them. But we also have to temper that with, we have to allow kids to be kids. And so part of that is, even as the adults, looking at when we're talking to our youth, where are our own biases? Yes, we want to prepare our kids, but we also have to give them grace that they are still trying to figure this out. Teens are going to be teens. I work with a lot of teens and they do silly things sometimes. And one of the things that is hard is that because they are Black teens, the consequences can be that much harder for them. And so it can be really hard as parents to not set those expectations up, because we know the harshness that they can be exposed to, but we also then have to allow them opportunities to be kids. So if that's extracurricular activities, if that's maybe modifying how we parent and how we talk about, consequences and the impact of their behavior, it's looking at finding different ways that we can kind of lessen that blow.
Thank you so much. And I think there's some comments as well. You mentioned the school to prison pipeline. Someone from Toronto says that also exists in Toronto and has for a long, long time. And in addition to you mentioned how children, as Black children, you learn, it's been internalized that you're not as smart as other counterparts. And someone mentioned that Black children aren't even tested for learning disabilities, even though they have a higher rate for these learning disabilities. Yep. I don't know if you have any way to elaborate on that as well and see how that can be changed.
Yeah, there's a study, it's called the Doll Test. I believe you can find it on YouTube. And I believe they've done it on kids as young as about 4 or 5. And they've got like a spectrum of these dolls, so white and a Black doll at kind of the end. And they'll just ask these kids questions. Which doll's the smart doll? Which doll's the prettiest? And you can imagine exactly where that goes. Even when you look at youth, what's the popular Coco Melon? Again, not running down Coco Melon. Who's the face of Coco Melon? JJ. I got a 2-year-old nephew, so I know some of this, right? When you JJ everywhere, or when you look at Sesame Street or any of these kid shows, who's doing the exploring? What do the kids of color, what are they doing? Are they supplementary? Are they in the background? Disney princesses, that's another one, right? Where it seems innocuous, but these are the messages that kids are receiving at a very young age. And so one of the things that studies have pointed out is the more that we can counter that with positive Black images, like there's Gracie's Corner for youth. So it's like Coco Melon, but with a beat, or Jules TV. I think those were 2 that my nephew was, it's the same thing, but it's representation and that matters. It's why The Little Mermaid, why having that live action, having, is it Halle Bailey? Having her be Ariel is so important, so that we counter that with having those positive Black images so that our youth can see that they are more than what the media will tell them, that our history is not just slavery. That's not where our history started. So the more that you can share those images and that knowledge is how we counteract and build up the self-esteem of our youth.
Awesome, thank you for that. We have Odian in chat. Snoop Dogg children's affirmations are great too. I haven't seen those, but I'll check it out. Last question, in terms of COVID-19 and how that's affected Black youth, you mentioned, parents or, adults that internalize, the effects of COVID, and then you bring it into the home and it kind of all explodes and, exasperates, previous mental health issues or problems that were there before. COVID was an exception, but are there ways that these things also manifest outside of the pandemic? And is there ways to improve these outcomes for Black youth in terms of mental health, living situations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, COVID-19 further amplified what was already there. And so the research is there, we know it. So part of it is for professionals to be mindful, right? Like, so it's getting the medical community to actually acknowledge and identify what's going on. It's for us to advocate, like even in the schools, right? Talking about these biases, that these are impacting our youth, talking about, I believe that there's a coalition for Black mental health, and they've been lobbying the government in Canada to access resources, improving community resources. I know in Alberta, there is a grant right now. I've got the name wrong. It used to be the Victims of Crime program. But now they've changed the name and you can access about $6,000 of mental health support through that program. All you need is it doesn't have to be a police report. I know that Veterans Affairs is also trying to expand that any person that's had any adult that served in the military and their children are experiencing mental health crisis due to their parent, they can now receive mental health covering through Veterans Affairs. So there's a lot of work trying to do the grassroots in the community, because that's where so much of this starts, right? Even faith groups. I know there's a lot more churches trying to come up with social support. So coming up with groups, partnering with different agencies to come up with safe spaces specifically for Black youth, or just Black people in general. So the more that we can actually get those resources out, of course, trying to find accessible therapy is not cheap. I know that as a therapist, that those are definite barriers. So I think the more that we can kind of partner with community, advocating the government, it's out there. And it's also about just kind of advertising it. I didn't even know that veterans or victims of crime had changed their program. And I work with the program. So if I don't know that, then these families that can get these services, they don't know it either. So so I think that's part of it as well, that it's out there. It's about promoting it and just providing that service and getting through that stigma. This is for everyone. Mental health is human health.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. And I'll open the floor up one last time if anybody has questions for Michelle at all. Okay, I think that's it. Again, thank you so much, Michelle, for this wonderful session and for the knowledge on, the basis of racism and the effects of COVID and how we can move forward as a community as a whole. Thank you for giving your time today. We truly appreciate it. And thank you, everyone. Let's just show some love to Michelle for the last 50 minutes here and doing an amazing job. So drop a heart, clap, whatever it is you want to do. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And Christiana also did put in the chat, if you'd like to reach out to Michelle, there's her LinkedIn and her profile on Psychology Today. So you can feel free to reach out to her if you would like to connect further. She's pretty accessible, which is awesome. So moving forward, we do have 2 more sessions left for the day. We have our keynote, which is Simone Saunders from the Cognitive Corner, coming up next. And at the very end, we have a very special activity that we all get to do together. It's a storytelling session by Eric Awo, who's a wonderful facilitator as well. So you make sure you stick around for that. In the meantime, we will take a 5-minute break. I believe it's 1:57 right now here on the west side of Canada. For those on the East Coast, it's probably 3:57 for you. So we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 4:02 if you're out east in Toronto. And for those of us out here in the west, we'll come back at 2:02. So enjoy the break and we'll be back with Simone.
Thanks, everyone.
Last, now everybody go to our breakfast. To go down for the result, to discuss, because I think I'm like, down, for me, I be a doctor. I go feed the girl, and I will feed the guys up, though. I put my life into it. Everybody go to our breakfast, have to say bye-bye. I wanna be in your life until the night is over. I wanna hold you so tight, coming closer. It's been a hell of a ride, but every single moment you were there by my side. You're there for my soul. That's why I call my own. I'll be there. Forever. through the storm, me as I am. I just love hold you for my hand. Hold you for my hand. Hold you for my hand. Oh, and yeah, my love is burning. Feels like time is frozen. Night is over. Every moment's gone again. Feelings I've been holding in. It must be love. Whenever I'm broken, you make me feel whole. Whenever I'm lonely, you're there for my soul. Wherever you are, girl, that's where I call my own. Without it, I'll be letting you know. See what you go there. As I am. Time that's what you get. I make her just love you, hold you for my hand, 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 hold you for my
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Now 2:03. So if you're back, if you can just do a little emoji, hand clap, exclamation mark. Don't want to get started without y'all here. Maybe just pop in the chat something just so we know y'all are ready to go.
Can I get a thumbs up? Emojis in the chat. Okay.
Thanks, Donna. Mary, Billy, awesome. Thank you, Eric. Dana, okay, awesome, okay. Okay, so I'm really excited to announce our next guest. So some of you may know her as, the Kelly Rowland Doppelganger, or TikTok's favorite therapist. We have Simone Saunders from the Cognitive Corner here, and she has been doing amazing work in the whole realm of mental health, especially on TikTok and Instagram, which is really awesome because it makes mental health, makes therapy, one, normalized, two, accessible, and three, it really puts us as Black people at the forefront. It's really awesome to see a Black therapist gain so much traction, and all her content relates to, other people can tap into it, but we know that it's made for us and made by us. So a little bit more about Simone. She's a graduate level registered social worker, and she's based out here on the West Coast in Calgary. I still claim it because it's really close to Edmonton. So it's super awesome to know we have a little celebrity close to home. She's also the founder of the Cognitive Corner, which is her psychological practice. We'll put in the chat her TikTok and the Instagram as well. So if you wanted to check out a little bit more on what she talks about over there, feel free. So she provides trauma-informed, culturally responsive psychological care and psychoeducation to Albertans and Ontarians. So you guys out in Ontario, you can tap into her services as well. We're going to include you. We'll give you a little bit of Simone. We're not going to keep her to ourselves. The Cognitive Corner seeks to provide accessible and affordable mental health services to racialized communities due to current lack of resources, which we know all too well. Today, she's going to speak on how to find your wellness as a Black youth, as a Black person, as a Black community in general, ways to identify when you're not feeling well and ways to pick yourself back up. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Simone Saunders.
Thank you so much, Yawa, for that incredible introduction. I do have a PowerPoint that I want to share. Do I have screen sharing? Oh, I do. Okay. Give me one. Can everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Yawa, for the introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here with you guys. And so I figured that I would start off by just telling you guys a little bit about myself. Yawa did a great job at that already, but just a little bit more about the Cognitive Corner. So the Cognitive Corner was founded initially as a social media site. So it was originally on Instagram in December 2019, and then that expanded to TikTok and whatnot over the years. And so the initial reason was because I really wanted to provide psychoeducation, because it was definitely something that I saw that was lacking in the community. So, you can go on Google, go on social media, and you can really find a lot about your physical health. But I found that there was not a lot about your mental health, and especially people of color talking about that. So that was something that was really important to me. And then when I founded the Cognitive Corner, the psychological practice, the reason for that was because for myself, when I went to go find a therapist, I wasn't able to find someone that looked like me or understood my experiences. And so from that perspective, I found that it was really important to have a practice that provides culturally responsive therapy, regardless of what practitioner you're seeing, regardless of their background and whatnot, because as Black people and as people of color in general, mental health is just higher in our communities. And so we definitely need access to people who can provide that support for us. So as Yawa said, we service mostly Alberta and Ontario. We also do have a therapist that can practice in a few different provinces. So as always, if you're looking for someone, definitely reach out to us and we will start talking about wellness. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what wellness means. So I'm curious from your guys' perspective, when you think about wellness, what comes to mind, whether that's like a definition or different practices? And you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Being happy.
Being happy.
I would say rest.
Rest, absolutely. Anybody else?
I would say doing the things that I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So by definition, I see someone in the chat says independent. So by definition, wellness is the quality or state of being healthy in body and in mind as a result of deliberate effort. And so I want to talk about that deliberate piece because I think it's really important as we talk about wellness that there is a lot of intentionality behind it. So when we think about wellness, it's not something that just happens just because, our life just happens to be going well or just going okay. So wellness is a result of deliberate and intentional effort on your part in order to make your life feel the way that you want it to feel. So when we talk about wellness, it's really important to talk about kind of like the mind-body connection. So physical wellness often feeds into our mental wellness. And that's something that isn't super highly recognized, especially among society. So a lot of us know that, okay, bits and pieces of our mental health might feed into our physical health and vice versa. But I think that it's important that we truly know the connection of the two. So I love to talk about kind of the nervous system and the brain when I talk about the mind-body connection, because they both really feed into each other, and it's really important to kind of understand these pieces so that we can understand what's going on in our body and our brain. So when our nervous system is activated, it releases a hormone called cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And we as humans were not designed to have cortisol kind of pumping through our bodies at all times, which as the state of the world, as a result of many different systems, a lot of us have consistent cortisol kind of going through our bodies, right? If we think about ourselves as Black people or people of color, the structural inequities that we often have to face, that is something that continually causes race-related stress. And so I think it's really important to understand the impact of cortisol on our bodies. And so I think I ran across a statistic that had said something to the effect that our bodies were made to handle cortisol to a time limit of around 10 minutes. And so the reason for that is because if there is a threat of some sort, then after about 10 minutes, that threat usually is gone, or the threat takes us out in a sense. So in general society, we definitely experience cortisol at a higher level more often than just 10 minutes. It can often be very ongoing. And so if cortisol is released way too frequently and for a prolonged period of time, it can cause a lot of adverse effects. So for myself personally, I notice that when I start to get stressed, my neck and my shoulders really start to tense up, or I'm someone who tends to clench my jaw a lot. So if I'm stressed, I might notice halfway through clenching my jaw that my jaw is really sore. So I'm curious from the audience perspective, when you get stressed, what are some physical habits that you notice?
I don't eat.
Okay, yeah. Christiana said shoulders for me too. Anybody else?
For me, sometimes I feel like I overthink to the point where my mind is blank. So there's like so much noise, but it's like so quiet at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I will
Headache.
mysteriously have a stiff neck that I can't move.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Any last ones before we move on?
I think someone in the chat, Kamika, said she gets headaches.
Absolutely. So we can have both physical and kind of behavioral adverse effects to stress. So we've talked a lot about the physical. Someone also just said sleep disruption, and that's a great one as well. And so from a behavioral standpoint, for myself, I tend to stay up later. I have a hard time waking up. I notice that I often spend a lot more time on my phone when I'm stressed, or I have a lot more difficulty or just lack of motivation to do physical activities or just kind of move my body in general. So again, from your guys' perspective, what are some kind of behavioral changes that you notice when stress is starting to increase in your life?
I would say focus is off or may not be able to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Someone put sleep disruption in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Any other ones?
I don't know how to say this concisely, but you know, when you have like almost so much to do or you're so stressed out that you don't do anything, like you just stop doing, like almost you retreat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like you kind of get frozen almost.
Yeah.
I know another behavioral one is, and yeah, you said this earlier, is that you tend not to eat. And so some people might notice different changes in their appetite, whether they eat too much or don't eat enough for their bodies. Some people might notice things like impulsive spending, impulsive eating. That one hit Yawa. Other things that you might notice is things like gambling. So a lot of these different sort of behaviors might accompany stress. And so I think it's really important to understand for ourselves, okay, when does my behavior stop going from, okay, my everyday sort of routine or everyday kind of fluctuation in routine to, okay, this is something that I need to pay a little bit more close attention to. Because a lot of times we can get stuck in this cycle where we don't notice that we're stressed until we're in the thick of it. And when we are able to notice kind of like the little signs and symptoms and signals that are the precursors for stress, then it allows us to kind of intervene a lot more easier. So I also wanted to talk about more specifically kind of how stress affects the body. So from a brain standpoint, concentration, anxiety, depression, mood, brain fog, those are big things around the impact of cortisol on your brain. From a cardiovascular perspective, just high cholesterol, high blood pressure, increased risk of heart attack and stroke. And so remember also that we're talking about prolonged periods of stress. So this is not your, you know, I have a test and that makes me really anxious and stressed, or I have a lot of work to do this week and that makes me really stressed. It's about prolonged stress. So if you're in school for, let's say, 2 years and consistently that's something that's stressing you out, if you have a high caseload or high workload for consistently, that's something that's going to be releasing cortisol all the time. From the perspective of joints and muscles, so increased tension, inflammation, aches, pains, muscle tightness. I don't know who was that spoke up, but they had said that they kind of wake up with a stiff neck. So that's something that definitely fits in here. From an immune system perspective, cortisol on a prolonged and increased level decreases our immune functioning. It increases our risk of becoming ill and increase in recovery time if we do become ill. As for our skin, it looks like hair loss, brittle hair, dull brittle nails, dry skin, acne, delayed tissue repair. A lot of people might notice that stress can impact their thyroid as well. So they might notice thyroid issues, which then kind of leads to other issues with the skin, like hair loss. As for gut, so that could be difficulty absorbing nutrients, indigestion, bloating, discomfort. So our gut is often referred to kind of in the psychology field as our second brain because of the interconnectedness between our brain and our nervous system and our gut. So when things are happening with our nervous system, our gut responds to that immediately. And so we might notice that difficulty absorbing nutrients and indigestion and whatnot, that might lead to a lot of weight gain that we don't intend on, or that might lead to a lot of weight loss. As for our reproductive system, that might lead to decreased hormone production, decreased libido, and increase in PMS symptoms. So on a holistic level, stress and cortisol release is something that really, really impacts us if we don't, if we're not really able to take a look at it. And so that's kind of like the precursor of what we're talking about today is wellness and the intentionality that goes with wellness. I'm also just looking at the chat here, and Mary is saying that Black women who face thyroid issues are often dismissed when approaching the doctor and are misdiagnosed, which is 100% correct. Definitely. I think that Black people, especially Black women, definitely face a lot more difficulties when it comes to getting diagnosed or just being in the health system in general, which is really difficult. And also just yet another reason why it's really important to kind of become in tune with your body and really start to understand the patterns that you might have so that we can pick up on these little nuances, because unfortunately, there is a lot of times where Black women aren't believed or Black people aren't believed around the symptoms that they might be experiencing. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about getting stuck in the stress cycle. So I know that when we think about the stress cycle, oftentimes we think, okay, once the stressor is gone, then that means the stress is gone, which is not true. So there were a few researchers named Amelia and Emily Nagowski. And so they researched stress to an extensive degree. And they talked a lot about the stress cycle and how important it is to complete the stress cycle. So the few things that they talked about in terms of what gets us stuck in the stress cycle is chronic stress, for one. So that is your consistent stress, whether that's school or work or family or socioeconomic, whatever that might be. Social appropriateness. So people thinking perhaps you should be over something. So let's say, for example, that maybe you are a single parent and you have a really stressful job, and both of those identities are quite stressful for you. The social appropriateness of, you just kind of have to stick it through or just kind of pull up your bootstraps oftentimes can be the rhetoric when it comes to people in general, but single parents as well. And so that social appropriateness of like, okay, I am stressed, I need like a full break, I need to figure this out without any distractions, that can be really difficult. And so a lot of times when things aren't deemed socially appropriate, we just kind of suck it in, suck it up, and push it down. And so that just kind of extends the stress cycle rather than allowing us to complete it. And then the third piece is the lack of education around the nervous system. So when we don't really know a lot about what's going on in our brain and our body, then it can be really difficult to make some of these changes. So I want to talk a little bit about proactive care. So when we talk about completing the stress cycle, it's really important to talk about the different types of care. So that can be proactive care and reactive care. So proactive care is essentially making choices that contribute to your wellness prior to extenuating circumstances. So this is before you start to get really stressed, before everything feels like it's piling on. These are kind of the routines that you want to develop so that you can build resilience to combat different mental health or physical health difficulties. So that can look like different routines. So for myself, I often find when it's warm out, I like to go for walks pretty much daily. So for me, the sun and the movement, all of that kind of stuff really helps me just feel grounded throughout my day. And it's also the physical health aspect of it as well. Sleep hygiene is something big. So for me, no matter what, I do my skincare at night and I brush my teeth and whatnot. And a large part of the kind of like the mouth care is that I wear a retainer. So I have to do it. So it's something that like kind of keeps me in that cycle of like, okay, even if I might not want to do it, even if I might be kind of in a lower period, there are certain things that I kind of just have to do, which also contributes to my wellness. So for you all, are there things that you notice that you're doing right now that you think would contribute to proactive care?
I would say for me, I have like really bad PMS, and one thing I noticed that really helps is like doing exercise and like my hip stretches and yoga. So whenever like I know, them times are coming, I really get on my routine and make sure it's like move my body and exercise because it really does pay off. Because when I start to lack with it and stuff, I notice like how much more stress I feel physically and mentally on my body.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that is so important, especially around our cycle, because there is definitely a lot more hormonal impact and just a lot more stress in general. Anyone else?
Trying to like plan when I know it's going to be like a stressful day, like blocking out more breaks throughout the day. And like putting on a timer sometimes just to like stop me from working, I think helps.
Thank you.
I think finding, because I noticed as like, you become more of an adult and you get older, it's really, really hard to make time to meet up with like people. And I find that sometimes you get stuck in this routine where it's like school, work, and you come home or whatever, you don't really get to engage with people outside of, social media or technology. So setting up like meeting invites with certain groups of friends to catch up or to do some social activities. So it's like, I can kind of forget or like avoid burnout where it's like I've been working for so long and I haven't had a chance to actually have fun or have a good time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I think all of the things that you guys are saying so far is really, really important as it relates to proactive care, because all of these different things allow us to kind of build in sort of structures and routines into our lives that kind of block those stressors, the ones that we can control at least. Anything else before I move on? I also see in the chat planning ahead for social events. Okay. So when it comes to proactive care, I think we've talked a little bit about routines, but something that is important to chat about when we talk about routines is the fact that I think that when we think about routines as a society, we think about, okay, this is something I do every single day. And if I don't do it every single day, then that means it's not a routine. And I think that when we have more flexibility with our idea of routines, it can be much more helpful in allowing us to feel like this is something I actually want to do. So for your routines, for example, are you doing things that you want to do, or is it just something that you feel like you should like? So for example, on social media, I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen kind of like the that girl sort of routine, right? You have your matching set, you have your green juice, you go for your walk, you do your Pilates, you do whatever it is, right? And so maybe you don't like Pilates or green juice or getting up early, and those things are okay. And I think that it's important to be honest with yourself about those things. So you're not going to stick to a routine where you don't like the things that you're doing. So maybe your form of physical activity is dancing in your living room. Maybe you don't have a matching set, which you don't necessarily need. Maybe you want one, and that's something that would help you. Maybe green juice is not your thing. Maybe you like smoothies. Maybe you just like water, or maybe you just like something different. And so your routine should be curated around what is best for you versus what is aesthetically pleasing or what are other people doing. And again, as it relates to routines, this doesn't have to be a routine every single day. So it can be that you have different types of routines for your energy level or your moods. So if you're feeling like, okay, you know what, I usually, let's say I go to the gym every day, but I wake up and I just don't feel like I have that much energy. Maybe my physical activity for that day is I go for a walk. Maybe my physical activity for the day is just making sure that I walk enough around the house. Maybe as it relates to, social events and whatnot, what I need is just a FaceTime with a friend rather than go out for dinner. Maybe that's what I have the energy for. So I think we sometimes kind of box ourselves into routines, and we either say, I'm either doing that routine or I'm not. And yes, adjusting as you go, I'm seeing in the chat, is really, really important. So allow yourself to make different compromises with yourself, different adjustments as far as the things that you feel, the things that you know. And if there's times where you know that you're going to feel a certain way, like someone had said during their period, they make sure that they're increasing their physical activity. So if there's different periods where you know you're going to feel different types of ways, plan around that. So completing the stress cycle is one of the last things I wanted to chat about with you guys. So when we complete the stress cycle, that's kind of our reactive care. So there's kind of 6 different ways to complete the stress cycle. And again, when we complete the stress cycle, it's not necessarily that the stressor has been removed. So the stressor may have been removed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the stress cycle is complete. So our body needs to feel that the stress cycle is complete, or that there's no longer a reason to be stressed, rather than behaviorally, let's say you quit your job. That doesn't necessarily mean that your body is going to be like, okay, I'm no longer stressed. Oftentimes we find that after long periods of stress, that's when a lot of the adverse effects hit. So for example, you might notice when you might go to school for, a couple of years, a year, let's say, and it's super strenuous. And then at the end of the school year, you're like, okay, this is my time. I want to book a vacation. I want to do whatever it is. And you notice after exams are done, that's when you start to get sick. And oftentimes it's not necessarily that you're just sick around that time. It's the fact that your body finally is able to kind of say like, okay, I'm able to be sick right now. So your stress is so high throughout the year that perhaps your body doesn't allow itself to be sick. And then once that stress level decreases a little bit, your immune system kind of goes and your body kind of expels some of those symptoms. So for you guys, have you noticed anything similar to that where you've gone through a really stressful period and then either in the middle or after the stressful period, you notice these symptoms or you notice yourself start to get ill. And someone in the chat says definitely.
Yeah, I
Any
would say
other
definitely
people
towards, seasons when I was in university, like after that April period or like December, like after the like during the holidays, like I noticed it like a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, holiday season especially is the time where people often get sick. And again, it's not necessarily always just because, you know, holidays, lots of people, a lot of times it's because of the stress, either kind of preceding the holiday or the stress coming after. Anybody else?
I'm not sure if someone said this, but definitely like the change of seasons, I feel like is a big one for me.
Mm-hmm. And do you mean change of seasons in regards to getting sick, or change of seasons in terms of just like mental health expression?
I feel like both. Like I feel like I'm just like such a sensitive person. I feel like whenever the seasons change, honestly, I think it's because we belong in Africa and my body does not know what it's due to itself. So like even with the winter, like even going to spring and summer, I always feel like some type of way, whether it's like allergies or like my skin's acting up or mentally, like I feel more sick or even like
Mhm.
sinuses and things like that. I notice it's just like consistently every couple months, my body just feels down.
Mm-hmm. Totally hear you. And I'm seeing someone else in the chat saying, I'm stressed when Manchester United loses 7-0 to Liverpool. I don't follow sports. I don't know if that's something that happened recently. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about completing the stress cycle. So physical activity. So again, for me personally, I love walking outdoors. So the combination of like that, the warmth of the outside and like just the physical movement is something that's super soothing for me. So when you are able to engage in physical activity, it allows for your nervous system to start regulating again. So instead of your nervous system being kind of in that survival mode, that fight, flight, freeze, it allows you to transfer to that rest and digest sort of system where you can start to utilize your systems again. Positive social interaction. So I think that a lot of times we don't necessarily understand or know the true impact of social interaction in our relationships. And so positive social interaction is something that contributes super highly to not only our positive mental health and mental well-being, but also to completing that stress cycle. So that positive social interaction should be with people that we are safe with, people that we like, of course. And so when we're able to have that positive social interaction, then it allows us to change our perspectives on the world. So you might notice when you're really stressed, for example, that server who gave you the wrong order, they did it on purpose. That you know, that person who bumped into you, they did it on purpose, and you're pissed about it. And so when we are stressed, we often have these different perspectives of the world of like, oh, this person is this because they did that, or this person is just out to get me, or they just wanted to ruin my day. Whereas when we have these different positive social interactions, it allows us to kind of slowly shift that perspective again with the intention of kind of completing that stress cycle. Maybe taking things more personally, absolutely, right? So when we are stressed, there's this meme that I find really funny, and I'm not sure if you guys will know which one I'm talking about, but there's this He's this older Black guy, and the meme is something that to the effect of like when you drop the keys to your house at the end of a long day, and he's just so distraught. And I think that's a meme that I love when it comes to talking about kind of when you're stressed and how heavy things can be, right? So that dropping your keys on a regular day would be fine. On a day where you've been stressed for the last couple of weeks, everything seems to be going wrong. It took longer to get home, all of those things. That key drop feels like kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So Christiana, taking things more personally, absolutely. Laughter. So laughter is something that helps regulate your cortisol. It increases your oxygen in your blood, which also contributes to your heart health, something that cortisol contributes negatively to. And it also increases your endorphins. So again, a lot of these have sort of a social element to it. And so our relationships are something that is really integral to kind of completing that stress cycle. Creative expression is something that's also helpful in reducing or completing the stress cycle. So that could look like journaling, that could look like art or pottery, or maybe music, writing, or music when you're playing music. All of those different things kind of facilitate or encourage us to express our emotions. And so when you're creating art, or even if you're singing, for example, you're singing a song that's already been made, it allows you to kind of express emotions in a way that feels authentic to you. And so that is something that is really helpful in kind of just allowing the emotions and the stress, so to speak, to kind of expel in your body. I'm definitely a shower singer as well. Crying. So a lot of people, I often find that crying is something that can be stigmatized to some extent. So a lot of people will be like, well, that's not something to cry about, or you shouldn't cry very often. But crying is actually super important for us because our tears help expel a lot of those, a lot of the stress hormone, which is cortisol, right? So when we're crying, it releases and flushes toxins from our body and flushes out the cortisol as well. And so that's something that can be super helpful. Like after you've had a really good cry, your body is kind of like, okay. Have you guys noticed that? Like when after you have a really good cry, your body kind of feels like, okay, I can start to get back to normal, or you start to feel really tired afterward, which is again, that rest and digest system coming back into play, saying like, okay, now that you've kind of expelled all of that, the threat is gone. Now I'm tired. Now I need to rest. I'm ready to go to sleep, says May.
I kind of get back on the saddle. Like usually when you have that one like mental breakdown where you just kind of like cry it out, now it's like, okay, I'm good to go now.
Yeah, there you go. All you need sometimes is a really good cry. And so I always say as well, if you notice that build up in your body, just allow it to happen. If maybe you're not in the safest space in order to do so, find a safe space, allow your body to kind of decompress in that way. And then you can kind of get that out and move along. And then the last one there is affection. And so that is from people that you trust, people that you feel safe with. And affection is really helpful, again, in just regulating ourselves because it decreases our heart rate and blood pressure and increases our oxytocin. And this doesn't always have to relate to other humans. This can be with animals as well. And so that social connection, again, is coming up because it's really important as it relates to just regulating ourselves. Because I think that it can be really easy when we are isolated or just only to ourselves. We have this little bubble, and that bubble allows us to just feel the stress and not alter our perspectives of, you know, the world is a stressful place, the world is a difficult place, people don't like me, or people are out to get me. And so then when we can have these different interactions, whether it's, you know, small positive interactions with just random people that we might not know, or close positive social interactions or affection with people that we love and trust, that can be something that's super regulating for us. Because, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I was just gonna say, I remember like in uni they would have like dogs. I forgot what it was called, but it was like during like exam time they would have like dogs come out and like you could
Emotional
just like,
support animal.
yeah, you could like pet them and like just kind of be around them, and it would like really help with folks too. Puppy
Yeah.
therapy, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish,
So the reason for the, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna add, I wish I had this in work settings too.
100%. 100%. Because that regulation of having somebody else is so important, right? So when we think about us as babies, the way that we learn to regulate ourselves is through co-regulation from our caregivers. So it's someone being present with us in a state of high emotion, and they're regulated and they're able to help our body and our nervous system kind of down regulate. So when we have, even as adults, we need that, right? So whether that is a safe person or an animal that's able to kind of stay calm and allow us to kind of just regulate, those things contribute so positively to reducing our stress and completing that stress cycle. So I think when it comes to proactive care as well, even though completing the stress cycle is reactive in itself, I think that if we, think about, okay, when the times that I am stressed, what is something that's helpful for me in some of these categories? What physical activity do I like to do? How can I go out and find positive social interaction, whether that is with, people that I may not know very well or people that I find very safe and trusting? How can I laugh? What is something that is accessible to me, easily accessible to me in these times that can make me laugh? Creative expression. What are things that you like to do? How do you like to express yourself? Make sure a lot of these things are readily available for you. And crying is something that's quite on the spot oftentimes, but affection. How can I reach out for support in order to allow the people that I love to give me that affection and support in the times where I'm stressed and I need it? I love watching animal videos for laughter. Absolutely. Love a good cry. So we can both be proactive and reactive. I think that stress is something that is going to continue to exist in this world. And so we will need both proactive and reactive care. But when we are able to be proactive about some of these pieces, it allows us to prepare for it, and it allows for the stress cycle to not feel as heavy as it would had we not prepared for it at all. So I think, the message that I want to leave you guys with is the more that you can prepare for these lower moments or these more difficult moments, the easier those moments become. And so I will leave it for any questions.
I love that. Thank you so much, Simone. This was such a wonderful and thorough kind of understanding of how our wellness works and how it works for us. I was wondering if anyone in the chat has any questions or comments for Simone, or about wellness, or about any of the stress symptoms we spoke about.
I have a question. So I think when people think about wellness, it's like the physical or mental. I feel like even in self-care, people neglect that there's emotional self-care. And I find that this is not like bubble baths, getting your nails done, but it's actually like stuff that you don't really want to do. So can you actually touch a little bit more on what emotional wellness or emotional self-care looks like holistically?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think that when we think about self-care, it's often like those bubble baths, getting your nails done, whatever it might be. But a lot of times it can be setting boundaries for yourself or with yourself. It can be, accountability for things that you might need to do. So maybe the thing that is going to contribute to your wellness or your self-care is the fact that you have to do your homework. And that's just something that you have to do, even though you don't want to. Right. So something that could be taking away from your wellness is saying like, oh, I'm going to have a bubble bath instead of doing my homework. So I think it's about, having the being able to self-reflect enough to know when is it the time that I need a break and when is it the time that I need to keep myself accountable, because a lot of these different more difficult things are contributors to our wellness. So, you know, going to therapy is one of those things too, right? Therapy might not always feel great because you're working through really difficult things, or you know, challenging yourself might look like challenging your own unhelpful patterns of behavior. So when are you the person that needs to kind of take a look at your actions and change those things? When is it that perhaps you're behaving in a way that, you know, isn't helpful for your relationships, whether it's with other people or yourself? So I think that, again, that's also falls kind of into that proactive care as well, as like taking a look and being really reflective of how can I take a look at my circumstances and the things that I need and give myself both the compassionate care and the maybe more mainstream sort of self-care of the, you know, the bubble baths, all of these different things. And then how can I also hold myself accountable when those things aren't appropriate? And really what I need is boundaries. Really what I need is accountability.
Thank you.
And I liked at the beginning of the session how you spoke about being intentional with these things, and intentionality. I think that's just really important to the way that you, I guess, see self-care and wellness, that something that you're doing, you know, for yourself at the end of the day. And I feel like we for sure all want people to find positive ways to kind of support their wellness as well.
Yeah, I think that intentionality piece is really important because without it, then we're kind of just drifting through day-to-day life, and we either are not stressed because life is happening to us, or we are stressed because life is happening to us. And so we have some power, so to speak, to change a little bit of that. And so it's finding the places where, what do I have control of and how can I take control of that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm wondering if any folks have any other questions or comments. You could unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I have a question for Simone. What would like some advice or tips that you'd give for folks that are like maybe starting their wellness journey, but have never really had like their own mental health needs addressed by themselves or their community, or don't even know half of the mental health words or jargons, but you know, there's a lot of folks I feel like that out there recognize certain things about themselves, but may not have like the language or supports to kind of name it. But like navigating that when folks kind of want to join this mental health journey, but they're not really equipped with the tools on how to navigate it. If there's any like comments that you have about that.
Yeah, so I think part of that goes back to reflection from my perspective. I think starting to reflect on the different pieces of your life. So, maybe reflecting on, do you currently feel content or happy with your life right now? Why or why not? Taking a look at your relationships. Do you feel currently content with your relationships? Why or why not? And so, looking at your relationships and both your life in general, in what ways are maybe other people, society, all of that kind of stuff contributing to whether your life is feeling good now or not so good? How are you contributing to your life feeling good or not so good? Same thing with your relationships. How are you contributing to your relationships being great or not so great? And how is the other person or other people contributing to those pieces? And I think when we're able to start off by at least saying, okay, what are things that feel good for me? What are things that don't feel good for me? And why do they feel good? So is it something that's destructive but feels good? So is it something that, like, for example, let's say you're impulsively spending and it feels good because you like having new things, but at the same time, it maybe feels destructive because you struggle to pay your bills for the rest of the month when you do those things. So taking a look at some of these pieces and like, okay, why does that feel good for me? maybe it's because I impulsively spend when I'm really stressed. Uh, because I know the other piece doesn't really feel good when I'm struggling to pay my bill. So taking a look at different pieces in your life, like what is the things that are serving you and feel good? What are the things that don't feel good? And maybe starting from there to kind of understand, and as well, kind of doing your own research and education in terms of your nervous system and your body. And I think that could be a great place to start when you're kind of starting your mental health journey, is really understanding your brain and your body and how it works. Because once we're able to kind of get a better handle on that, then it allows us to start noticing different things for ourselves in our lives.
Thanks, Simone, for that answer. That's gave me a lot to think about.
No problem. And I'm also seeing in the chat here, be confident in your ability to find that resting state for oneself. Absolutely.
If there are no more questions or comments, we would love to thank you so much, Simone, for this session. Definitely learned a lot. And I always feel like with these things, especially when we start the conversation, we learn something new every time. So thank you again. And I've provided Simone's socials and website in the chat. Please definitely go follow, and there's more information provided on her website. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, oh yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, thanks so much for that, Christian, and thank you again, Simone. And thank you everyone for sticking with us so far. We hope you've learned a lot. We hope you've been able to engage. We hope you've taken away something for yourself or for someone else that you can share after this conference. We are almost at our end here. We have one more awesome session coming up, and this is something that's going to be really fun. The whole purpose of Be You, Be Well, which is the theme of this conference, is to help us learn information and also create our own narrative. So we actually have a storytelling session coming up here after a break, which will be about 5 minutes, where we actually get to do that. We get to create our own story. We get to create our own narrative as a community. And as all of us here together, it'll be led by Eric, and he'll introduce himself once we come back. But I really hope that after this break, we can all come back and engage and speak up and share our own thoughts and feelings on making this one wonderful story. Our plan is to actually transcribe it after, so we can actually read what we came up with, read our own narrative, and how we plan to be ourselves and be well in the process. So please keep that in mind as we go and come back. We really want to hear from you. We would love you to engage, put in your thoughts, your comments, your feelings, your own questions, your own experiences, to make this story and narration something wonderful. So it is 2:55. We will take a 5-minute break. Well, 2:55 for us here on the West. If you're out in the East, 4:55? 4:55? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to create an awesome creative story together. And once again, thank you so much, Simone, for all the information and the lovely presentation. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
crew. I'm telling you, I love your crew. Make you dance to the beat.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Y'all, I saw that may have been having some issues. You're on mute.
Yes, kick me out. So thank you.
No worries. Can we get a thumbs up, reactions, comments in the chat? Let us know you're back. Thank you, Donna. Great. So we are very, very excited to start off this session, but first I will just take the time to introduce our facilitator for today, Eric. I want to pronounce your last name properly. Oh, Awa? Did I get it? Awa? Okay. Eric Awa is a dancer, teacher, choreographer, as well as a storyteller and scholar from Ghana with expansive practice in the contemporary Ghanaian African dance genre. He has taught and performed extensively in higher educational institutions, professional and amateur dance companies in Ghana, Norway, Hungary, Romania, Burkina Faso, clearly international, to mention a few. His elements of indigenous theatrical forms his contemporary African Ghanaian workshops explore the embodiment of selected aesthetic elements of indigenous theatrical forms on an unfamiliar and unresponsive body through tropes and finds ways to bond the body and these elements. This workshop is open to beginners, intermediate and advanced level dance practitioners, lovers of art, and anyone who wants to learn and have fun at the same time. So if we can all give a warm welcome to Eric.
Yes, can you hear me?
Your volume is a little bit low, but we are getting some claps and some celebration.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better.
Oh,
now.
brilliant. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm sure many people, when you heard that I'm a dance scholar, dance performer, you were expecting some chisel face, possibly look at my face and tell I have a six packs. Well, I'm here to disappoint you. I am divorced from my six packs. We have been divorced for a very long time. I've been trying to get my six packs back, but it's been very difficult. So I don't have the six packs anymore. Quite recently, just this past month, on the 18th of February, we did a performance here in Edmonton. And then I hadn't performed for a while, so I danced with the performers. And then when I got home, I was telling my wife, oh my God, when I was dancing, my tummy was shaking. And she didn't say anything. And I said, it is not just my tummy, my boobs were shaking. I have boobs. And then she went to the closet and brought a black sports bra and just stood in front of me and handed it to me. And I said, what is this insult? Please give me the red one. You know, that is my favorite color. So yes, it is becoming very challenging. Yes, but thank you so much. I'm just here to talk about stories, narratives. I am a performer at heart. So I'm just here to share some sort of indigenous knowledge on narratives and storytelling constructions from back on the continent. I came here in the thick of the pandemic, December 2022, with my wife. And I mean, as we all go through the transitions, we are all finding ways to make ourselves useful to the ACB community. So I really cannot thank you enough for this opportunity. So I'm talking about finding your story. I listened to all the presentations, and most of the presentations have spoken what I'm going to say anyway. So I'm just here to highlight some few elements that has to do with our bodies in the mental health discussion. So I start with, since our bodies move and position subject and object along culturally conditioned dimensions of space, and their embodied knowledge in turn are embedded in stories people tell themselves, people tell to others. There is a need to investigate how narrative structure, tropes, and bodily experiences and issues of mental health influences performance of ACB youth in the diaspora. So by understanding how narratives are embedded within nuclear family spaces to larger community spaces, national and diasporic spaces, we can then begin to understand how the body is positioned to influence effective and affective communication within Black communities. So as a performer, I'm taking this from an embodied point of departure, just highlighting how our bodies can become sort of canvases for creating stories, for communicating in our communities, especially about mental health. Yawa, if you can please make me a co-host, I'd like to share a little slide and then go on from there.
Sounds good, Christian. If you could actually do that, since I don't know. Pardon me.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Oh, this one. Okay, so I'm taking storytelling or narrative or tropes from the African indigenous perspective. And then you cannot talk about stories about yourself or about the community without starting from the beginning, wherever that is, right? But the good thing is that every community or every person or every people have their own conception of where things began for them. So if we are talking about various ethnic groups or let's say communities in Africa, we talk about the cosmology, the origin of wherever they came from. Now, how would it feel if you just appear on this earth and then you get up and you're walking around and you're seeing things you haven't seen before? You're trying to make meaning of how these things came into being. You're trying to explain to yourself, what came together to form this water body? What is happening up there? Why is up there different from down here? What are these animals flying over here? What is this creeping on the ground? And people find these answers through stories and narratives. They create them, they inherit them. And these stories, whether true or not, whether they are mythologies or not, begin to form sort of the conceptions of their beginning. And so eventually they develop stories, these stories develop into worldviews. And these worldviews, whether they are like communal worldviews or not, individual people at all times have different interpretations or perceptions of these worldviews, even though they are in these communities. Now, you go into traditional African belief systems and you find these worldviews based on different ethnic conceptions, right? But in as much as colonization has done much to, let's say, debase and debunk African worldviews as important to, let's say, explaining who are we or what are we doing here on this earth. I'm proposing that these become the worldviews and the belief systems becomes conduit for understanding self and community, because these worldviews bring us together, right? Now, within these traditional belief systems are also subsystems like religion, for example, like sports, like war. There are various sort of independent elements that come together to form these worldviews, and these in turn form or create communities. Now we have the supreme being, whatever that means to anyone, whatever that means to any community, but to African traditional belief systems, to make sense of the world around them, to make sense of the things happening to them, to make sense of the stories, to make their stories meaningful to generations after them. It is impossible to separate the mystical or the supernatural from the physical things. So in most African traditional belief systems, you have supreme beings or a pantheon of gods. So supreme being, smaller gods, and then you have music, dance, drama, social hierarchy, social order, all of this becoming one ball of storytelling. And so you would hear stories that make you question the very, let's say, intelligence of a people. But I wrote here in the middle that, I mean, the moment you hear a story, you become part of it, because it helps you interrogate. A story or a narrative or a trope is anything that helps you interrogate yourself at a particular point in time. So you are not different from any story. Whatever is happening to your neighbor, your sister, your brother, your friend, your community, you are part of it. The moment it hits your ears, you become part of it. Now, these smaller gods these gods are a means
through which ancient or even current Africans who believe in traditional religion, these are mediums to understanding the environment or the society, right? And then they find ways to express these kinds of understanding through creative means like music, dance, dramatic actions, and all of these morph into sort of a social order that is demarcated through the hierarchy. So you have the ruling class, you have the working class, you have the warrior class, you have the creative class. All of these come together because society is trying to understand who it is through the story. Now, right from these mystical or metaphysical element of any community, then we ask ourselves, how do we connect faith and mental health? How do we do that? And I wrote here, we have to explore the balance. So in further discussions, when we get to the storytelling session, which by the way is going to be participatory, because I'm not going to tell you any story. I don't have any stories to tell you. We are all going to create the story together, because right from what I've said now, we have realized that we are all creators. We are all performance artists. We don't just practice it like people do on the stage, but we are all performing people. So don't think that because of my white beard, I have a lot of stories in my mind. Please, this beard is makeup for my presentation. It's special makeup I put on, right? So yes, so from this same cosmology and of the self and the society, then we come to understand the agency of the Black body. The Black body has gone through so many changes. So as Black youth or as Black people, it is very important to understand the power of our bodies in every given time. Because if we don't come to that understanding, if we don't come to that realization, we will not own our stories. Other people will own the stories for us. They will tell us stories they see from their perspectives and project them on our Black bodies. And this has been happening for many years, even still happening now. So this is just a call to own the Black body again. Have that kind of understanding of where you come from. That is why I started from the cosmology, from the very beginning, because you need to learn that, you need to understand, for example, as a performer, whatever movement I perform in any traditional Ghanaian dance I do is not just a performance of a movement in space or this current space. It is a combination, or let's say it is an amalgamation of years of embodied knowledge that have been passed on to me. So when I pick up, or when my teacher taught me any sort of movement system or any sort of dance and I did it, I had this understanding within me that I wasn't just performing something that matched my body or my physique. I was embodying, or I was putting on myself layers and centuries and years of knowledge that have been passed on from generation to generation. So when I'm dancing, my understanding of this agency, of this body, is that it is the most effective tool or the most powerful tool to communicate whatever I need to communicate at that particular point in time. So I am very particular about what I do from a gestural point of view in a performance as a performer. How do we claim this Black body back in the diaspora, for example? Because the data shows that many ACB youth struggle with institutional racism, colorism, they struggle with identity, right? And so if we don't sit down to address or understand how these influence the performance of their bodies as Black children, we are going to lose them along the way. Now, there is this concept called African genius that was propounded by the first president of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. You know him as a philosopher, as a Pan-Africanist, as a champion of Black independence. If you have time, read about him. He's a philosopher. He has written a lot of books. Now, the African genius is a concept that he propounded in 1963 when he was instituting the first ever academic institute of African studies on the continent. So mind you, this was a time where the Cold War had begun and the colonial powers were like ceding power to the Black people. And at a point in time, you realize that in Nkrumah's writing, he keeps saying that they haven't totally left There are neo-colonial ways of controlling the Black person. And until we Black people take hold of our stories, take hold of our situations, understand them, and then use them to our advantage, we are always going to be prone to external influences from the neo-colonial bodies, whether we are on the continent or out of the continent. So the African genius he proposes as a sort of methodology, as a sort of insight for the Black person to understand that you dwell in years and centuries of genius. You can't tell me that my forefathers didn't know how to create rain or call down rain. There are dances, there are musical performances that are specifically performed to call rain. And each time these dances are performed, it rains on their crops. And so if that is not scientific, I don't know what you're talking about. So modern science and colonial narratives have come to denigrate the sort of appropriate technologies Black people used in the past to make life comfortable for them. And these neo-colonial narratives or the colonial narratives have transcended its authority on the continent and brought it to the diaspora, to the point that it is very difficult to express yourself as a Black person in North America or anywhere you find yourself because of your skin. So African Genius is a call to reality of the Black body as an agency of affective authority. Right. Now, in every story, in every African narrative, there are four main elements. That is the visual, the musical, the bodily, and the multisensory stimuli. Now, we call this multisensory modalities. Now, life in African societies, how these stories are interconnected, is as a result of sort of the communitarian approach Africans take to building community or building society. Now, everybody is connected to somebody. Right. So a group of people, in creating their own narrative structure of who they are and the stories they use as morals to help their kids grow, they have these visual elements. These visual elements can be like paintings, architecture, let's say colors, for example, that each ethnic group identifies with. So among the Akan people of Ghana, for example, when you see red and black, or among the Ashanti people, when you see red and black, it signifies blood and what? And darkness. And this can be transcribed into periods of sorrow and periods of war. So in the past, when the Asantis would go to war, they would adorn their musical instrument, their war musical instrument, with these colors. And in each time the warriors saw it, it communicated to them immediately that this is a time of seriousness and we are going to war. So these visual elements add to the story of who the Akan people or the Ashanti people are. Then we come to the musical element. Because music is a surrogate for the voice, sometimes we communicate to the supernatural, for example, through music. We communicate to the mystic through music. We communicate to ourselves through music. So there is no story, indigenous story, that does not have a musical element. Number three is the body. The body is the most important element of any storytelling. We have to have characters. And today, that is what we are going to create. You are a character in your own story. So when I start the story, all of us are going to find ourselves in there, right? And then we talk about the last thing, multisensory stimuli, or we call it multisensory modalities. And these are the balances and the imbalances of any individual person and a community. The concept of balance is so important here because when the scales are tilted to the left or to the right unevenly, there is bound to be some negative reactions that come out of these things, right? And so when I say balances and imbalances, means the things that are within that makes us respond to stimuli. And according to the data, most times Black kids are unresponsive when you try to find out what is wrong with them. When you try to find ground to talk to them, they don't give anything back. It is not because they don't want to. It is because we haven't explored various mediums or effective ways of hearing or listening, not just auditory. We need to look at performance as well. And so music and dance, like music and dance, it takes a lot of elements to make art or tell a story. So once one aspect of it is missing, the meaning of the story to the teller first and the people who are listening to the story is shaking, right? because storytelling is therapeutic. Telling your story with a revelatory end allows you to, most importantly, to heal, and then give you the opportunity to heal others. And so storytelling or art allows us to connect in ways that discussions like this don't, right? You need to understand, for example, religion. You need to understand spirituality. You need to really delve into it and not just scratch the surface and begin to talk about it. You begin to confuse yourself the more. You need to understand your religion in order for its rituals to make sense, because everything is ritualistic in most African societies. When we say ritual, it hasn't always have to deal with the supernatural. It doesn't. Things that you do at a repetitive, let's say, spectrum to receive a specific kind of answer, these are all ritualistic, right? And so we must understand as ACV youth the difference between these two dynamics and how religion comes into being, because you can't really fight something you don't understand, right? Great. So before we go on, I'm just going to play a video of a dance performance on YouTube that is from the Ashanti region of Ghana. The dance is called Kete. It used to be a court dance. It is very gestural, expressive. So I'm going to take time to explain certain element of it so that I can help you understand later, right? Where is it? Okay. So let me make sure. Yeah, well, how am I doing with time?
About 25 minutes.
Left. Okay. So after this, we go into the storytelling session. Everybody can see the screen? Can you hear the music?
Yeah.
Can everybody hear? Okay, good.
Yes.
Now this is a funeral. So let me just give you that. And I'll tell you the story he's dancing. Okay, so I'm just going to stop here for a bit and explain what is happening. Now, I'm sure most of you saw the movement. He crossed his hand here on his chest. This is familiar because it was popularized by the Black Panther franchise, right? Now, everybody does Wakanda, Wakanda, everybody is fine. It has become synonymous with Black Panther and Black movement, right? Now, when I saw the movie and I was asking myself, this is a story that the Ryan Coogler and co put up on the screens for us to look at this utopian view of Africa, for example. And this movement became very poignant with that story. And so I was asking myself, do the people in the Black people in the diaspora know where this movement is from and its longer implication? Because this movement is part of a longer linguistic structure in this dance, for example. Now, in this context of the funeral, if it was a king who did this movement, the longer sentence will be, he will roll his hand to the right, roll his hand to the left, roll it in and cross it on his chest. What that sentence means, 1, 2, 3, 4. All these 4 motifs, what they mean is that as a king, if you go to the east, if you go to the west, all power belongs to me. So in that sentence, or in that sentence, he's demonstrating his authority as the monarch, right? And then the Black Panther movie just used Wakanda Forever, Wakanda Forever. So I just kept asking, these people did their research very well, and they extracted that element of the dance by the Ashanti people and employed it in the movie. But how is that connected to the African diaspora, ACB diaspora, for example? Now, he kept doing this and touching his head. He wasn't, what he's doing is bodily communication. He's telling everybody that there's a lot of weight on his head. He's grieving. So when he's grieving, he's sad because it is a funeral. He's sad. And then when he opens his arms, instead of this and does this, he needs comfort, for example. So although many people, even the family members, are not doing this, by him standing in that space and demonstrating these gestures, he's communicating, or he's carrying an entire family's grief on his body and telling the story to everybody sitting there. Now, there is a power relation here somewhere. Okay, I'm just going to play this briefly. It's about, yes. Now, there is a chief sitting there, and he's dancing to the chief right now. So what he did, he was telling the chief, for example, technically at his age, as a young person, you cannot point your fingers at any elderly person. You get a knock, a slap, or something worse in an African society. But in the narrative or in the storytelling, he is doing this to the chief, and he's telling him the sentences. He does all the movement and then wags his fingers left to right, and then points to him, and he's telling him, nobody except you are the strongest. If we went ahead, he would point to the sky and then point to the ground and then hit the ground 3 times. So the story he's communicating is, now in that particular gesture or variation, he's telling the king that there is no human being above him. So that is praise poetry. There is no human being above him except God. So he points to the skies, and they say the supreme God is the one who gives you power. So there is nobody on this earth stronger than you except the supreme God. Right? So in this kind of telling or story or narrative, the body assumes the position of the storyteller. They don't have to speak. And that is where the power of the body comes, the agency of the black dancing body. That is where it becomes very poignant. Now, could it be that in the diaspora, we are not finding ways to engage the youth in these creative sort of methodologies because we don't have the expertise? One, we are dislocated and dissociated from the indigenous knowledge systems like music and dance from the continent. And so when we get to spaces like this, it becomes very telling when we cannot resort to our bodies to communicate whatever we are feeling as a youth group, because whatever happens within us must come out most of the time for people to understand and help us out. Our bodies are to be used as mediums for communication. But is it possible that we are losing the sort of approach to finding? I mean, I have nothing against group discussions, focus group discussions. They are fantastic because these are mediums for people who can speak to speak, for people who gather courage to do it. Now, is it possible to create avenues for creative expressions like Simone was talking about, in ways that it would help us identify certain vocabularies like what the boy was communicating, restructure them, reconstruct them in the diaspora in ways that it will help us stay rooted to the indigenous music and still find ways to heal from the music and communicate our feelings and our problems to our communities. Is there ways to do that? I mean, these are the questions that we can leave ourselves with. Now, we get to this is out of the way. So we are going to go into the storytelling session. I mentioned all of this. I talked about all of this so that you understand that you are not the listener of the story. You are the storyteller. So as we go into the story right now, I mean, I told you a story from the beginning about my 6 packs. The story hasn't been completed. I'm still because yes, our lawyers are talking behind the scenes. Nothing is happening, right? Nothing is happening. So I always have a story to extend with my 6 packs, which is now 1 pack in front of me. So what we are going to do right now, that I will entreat everyone with all humility to unmute, possibly. We don't have to see your faces. I'm not interested in seeing your face. If you don't want to show your face, with all humility, yes. All I want is your voice. All I want is your voice. So this is what is going to happen. I'm going to start a story. It can be fictional, it can be true, it can be false. It doesn't have to be about me. It doesn't have to be about anyone. I can use any names I want. The only rule is that we don't curse in the stories. We don't use curse words, because if we do, I'm very stressed right now because Manchester lost. So if we go into cursing, I'm going to release a tirade of unpleasant words, which I'm going to bring my team and my coaches and everybody in it. They don't have to do anything. But this is how it's going to be. I'm just going to start a story. Any of you can pick it up in whatever direction you feel. It doesn't have to correlate with my story. It doesn't even have to even follow my story. It just has to be a story. You can speak about anything you feel like it has been kept within you and you haven't had the expression to say it. This is the space to do that. Just start anywhere. Use any names. Use any scenario. When you hear me say ago, that means I'm taking back the stories to myself. I'll restart it and then we go another round. How does that sound? Wonderful people, how does that sound?
Sounds good.
Please don't be
Sounds good.
silent on me. Please don't be
Good.
silent on me.
Great.
Can we have everybody say Yaman?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
Oh,
Yeah, man.
yes. Now, oh, thank you very much. I mean, somebody asked me, what are your pronouns? I said, he, him, Yaman. So what does that mean? I said, I have no idea. It just sounds nice. So as a joke, I have it on my complimentary card. Yes. So wonderful people, I'm going to start the story. I'm just going to go along with it. Once upon a time. Then you say time. Once upon a time.
Time.
I heard only 3 people. Please, this is not motivating enough. My stomach is not moving in place. I want it to move. Please give me a rousing response. Once upon a time.
Time.
For some reason, my computer screen is flickering. These are the demons have followed me here right now. I'm going to start with demons. Okay. I'm going to start with demons. Okay, so once upon a time.
Time.
I sat under a tree, contemplating what I was doing wrong in my life. I had done everything I was told to do as a child. I had respected everybody who needed my respect, whether they deserved it or not, because I was told to. I just don't understand what is happening. Because after doing all of this, I still feel I'm unfulfilled. I feel there is something to be done. There is something more to be done. And this is weighing heavily on my brain. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about it. I just can't stop thinking about it. Some months ago, I heard a friend tell me share her experience. She said, at a point she sat down and felt that the whole world was coming upon her because she was Black in a society that didn't understand its power, its authority, its beauty. And so she hated herself. And she wanted to be another color, another race. Then I said, wait a minute, can you do that? And she said, no, but the weight of it is too much. I can't talk to my family. I can't talk to my friends. I can't talk to my community, she said. I felt my family wouldn't understand, or even they would call me crazy. And I would constantly hear these words ring in my head. Shame on you. You are a disgrace. You are Black. Ew. African booty scratcher. Whatever that means. You are a disgrace. There's something wrong in your head. She kept hearing these words in her mind. And another friend said, maybe go to church and speak to the pastor. But she asked again, will that even help? So, well, just try it. She went to see the pastor, and the pastor immediately said, this is a demon. This is a demon from your family. This is a demon from your father's side, your mother's side. They have met somewhere under the tree. They have searched out people in your family, and you are the unlucky one. I'm going to pray for you, believe it, and they will be gone. And she asked herself, demons? What the heck? Demons? What? Demons from where? This weight on my head can't be demons. I don't know how to explain it, but Pastor, I don't believe you. And the pastor immediately said, what? The demons have taken over. The demons have taken over. Shabadabadabadabadaba. The demons have taken over. Shabadabadabadabada. The demons have taken over. Shabadabadabadabadaba. Be gone, be gone, be gone. Well, when I heard be gone, I just stepped out because I thought he was talking to me because I don't have demons. But I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. When she told me this and I heard her story, I immediately embodied that, and now I have double problems because I can't find solutions to mine, and she's my very good friend. What am I going to do? Somebody else pick it up. Somebody else pick it up.
After the experience, I went back to the tree. I sat down underneath the tree and I watched spring become summer. I watched summer become fall, fall become winter until spring sprung again. And yet the problems remained. The weights on my head fell onto my shoulders, onto my chest, onto my knees, and onto my feet. And I struggled to stand up and move from the tree to think about the problems that I had, to think about the problems my loved ones had. And I felt a burden to find solutions to them all, to find solutions to the demons that plagued me and followed me and infiltrated the lives of my family and friends. I talked to the trunk of the tree. The trunk of the tree told me to talk to the branches, and the branches told me to talk to the leaves until the leaves fell into my lap. And I began to count the fallen leaves, but I also began to count the leaves that had remained on the tree. And I thought to myself, if some leaves fell and some leaves remained, how could I be a leaf that stayed on its branch, that stayed with its tree, that remained with its roots? How could I remain grounded and not become a fallen leaf?
The story is waiting to be told. The story is waiting to be told. The story is waiting to be told.
After counting the leaves and watching the day go by, the sun started to set and the sky started to turn gray. Before I knew it, the sky started to cry cry down on me, and I started crying too. So I released all the burdens, all the stress, everything that was built upon me from my own experiences and from my loved ones and my friends and my family. And I let it all go. I let it all go. The tears from myself and the tears from the cloud. It went down into the ground to nourish the earth and my soul, to hopefully grow something new.
But then I was reminded of that story my friend told me, and I was kind of stuck on it. I was just wondering, how can I help her through it? Because I've been there too, when my parents sent me to pastor and told me to just pray about it. And I still didn't know what to do. So just trying to think, what can I do to help her? Maybe I could think of something that helped me through it that I could share with her, but sometimes it's just so challenging. You just don't know what to do because you have all these ideas and doubts in your head that keep telling you, they keep telling you these negative ideas about yourself that you know aren't true, but then you keep hearing it over and over again. And you're just stuck with what to do.
Is it true that alcohol takes away your problems? I'm wondering. Is it true? Is it true that in that state of mind, anything that you get to numb it for a moment can help you solve it eventually? Is it true? Does that work? Because I've heard people tell me it is not true. And yet I've heard people tell me it is true. And I've seen people be happy in it. Is it true? I don't know what's happening. I'm confused. And at this point, I'm just going to mention names. And I mention, and then you just jump in wherever you feel like it. We are still telling the story. This is not an interlude. This is part of the story. It doesn't have to make sense. That is what Donna said. And Mary lifted her hands to say something. Also.
So Donna lifted her hands in faith and hope and expectation, because alcohol is just a crutch. It's a false crutch that when it wears away, you're back to square one. So it doesn't solve any problem. You know, it may be temporary in its solution, but it doesn't provide a permanent solution. I think defining oneself, you know, knowing who you are and having the convictions of self, of, okay, what are my values? What am I born with? The young man danced and demonstrated the power of communication through dance. Sometimes when there are no solutions, it's good to beat a rhythm, you know, let the rhythm pick up your spirit and take you to another place and give you courage that this is connecting you to your ancestors. This is one of the languages they left you with that leads you to analysis of a different kind. You know, even if it's taking up a fork and a spoon and beating a little drum, and moving your body with it relieves sometimes some of the stress that you may feel when you don't see a solution coming forward. You know that your body still has that energy and that rhythm to search for solutions other places, you know, because this is always with you. This mood and this energy that you have, you just have to look inward to find it. And it helps you, and it helps take you down other corridors of hope and power that may not be obvious. You know, even when you go to the pastor and he says, no, you know, what, you calling me names? It means that you're looking to someone else to help you find a solution that is already in you. You know, so you go back under the tree and look at how many leaves stayed on the tree. Not how many fell in your lap, how many stayed on the tree. The tree continues to nourish season after season. The leaves, fresh leaves come forward because the root, you're rooted in a culture and a heritage that will always nourish you in times of stress and tension. Did I say too much, Eric?
These are the wise words that came from the deity, Donna. To us
I'm
under the
Yoruba.
tree.
I'm Yoruba, Caribbean Yoruba.
Caribbean Yoruba deity.
Yes.
I salute you. These are the wise words that came down. And then Mary picked it up. Mary decided to run with these wise words. And Mary said,
I went to the tree and I asked the tree, Mother Tree, why are you sick? I see in your trunk the veins, black. You're ill, but I don't understand why. You're strong, you're eternal, but you're withering away to return to the earth. Why do you need to leave? I take a look at the leaves. The leaves are turning color. They're dry. They're brown. They're not healthy, Mother Tree. I don't know what to do. The sky breaks and it starts to rain. It rains and it rains. And I realize that I'm crying. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I take a look to the ground where my eyes are focused, always to the ground, bound in the darkness, in the negativity, in the round and round and round of criticism. And in the roots, I see a small sapling. Mother Tree, you have a child. It is growing. So you are going away, but you are coming back to the roots to regenerate the earth.
yes, the child is growing. The child is growing, the child is growing. The child is growing. But will it inherit this mindset? Will it continue on this path that I am on? How do I shield the child from this mindset? Shantavius sent out the love emoji as a signal. as a signal. As a signal. So all of us gathered before Shantavius and asked her, "Oh, Shantavius, oh, Shantavius, oh, Shantavius, how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this, Shantavius?" Shantavius sends out text message to our group chat. Everybody's phone begins to make noise. And it's one message: "I'm esteemed." What does that mean? Oh, why, Shantavius? What does that mean?
Once the word went out to believe in that healing process, it's just some information. I mean, I've heard each one's words here. Even when a young lady spoke about what am I to do, sometimes we just have to trust and believe for those when maybe we can't produce something in the physical, but because we believe in our ancestors before us that survived and that paved the way and we sit on their shoulders, that is doing something. I think one of the earlier speakers talked about that when we think we're doing nothing, we are doing something. That right there just made my soul smile. So I am esteemed in which when that word goes out, that I believe that even in the moment of not so all right, in which we think it should, it's not going according to what we feel it is, that there's that maybe one person that is trusting and believe that we get through that moment in time. And neither none of us know how quickly that will take place, but we are trusting and believing of a healing, of a recovery, of that aha moment to say I survived. So that's where I'm at, listening to this, the communication, the words that have been spoken.
Why, Shantavius, brings us hope, hope as Black people, hope in our community, hope. And then the elders of the community, the Bailey, Lady Unique, Shelley, Michelle, and Lisa, now sit in a circle and decide to exhort us and move us out of confusion to light, just as Shantavius has already laid the way. Elders of the land, Elder Shelley, Elder Unique, Elder Ebele, Elder Lisa, whom I met, Elder Michelle. Elders, your children are waiting for you. We are hungry. We are hungry. We are hungry. Elders, we are hungry. Elder Ebele beckons us to keep quiet because elders,
we're starving,
are going to feed us. Elder Ebele, do you want to dance before you speak?
I think I'll just speak.
Please.
I think of all the words and the wisdom that has been shared by everybody before me. And my mind goes back to the trees and the leaves and the roots and what it symbolizes as rejuvenation. I also think about the talk about my parents sending me to the pastor. And what comes to mind is that they did that because they believe that as a Black person of African descent, we have a strong belief in our faith and in, I think, something that I call our Blackness and resilience, that no matter what we are faced with, if we go back to our roots and we dig deep, we shall overcome. So thinking about the pastor is also saying, remember that the power to overcome lies within you. So on a daily basis, no matter what I'm faced with, I remember that there is hope. Once there is hope, then you've got life. And with life comes challenges and stressors and everything you can think of. But as long as you stay true to yourself and to your background and your faith and your beliefs and your values, and thinking about the pastor again, going back to your religion and your faith in God, that you would always overcome.
And Elder Ebele leaves us thinking deeply about our own understanding of religion. Elder Ebele has got me thinking about my own faith in Christ, that I need to strengthen it. I need to strengthen it. And Elder Lisa wants to say something?
Yes.
Please, can you also
to-
send us e-transfer after you're done?
I can just send you my powerful words.
Oh, please do.
Yes, to the children of the community, I want us to remember that although the leaves may fall, the roots underneath the earth of each of our trees are connected. So help us to remember that as we are all going through our processes, as our leaves are falling, as we may wither, as we may grow, that underneath the soil, we are connected in community, and that is where our strength and our power lies. And so help us to also know that hope requires us to not fear, but to turn towards love of ourselves and love of the process and love for each other. And that is what I will leave you with. No e-transfer.
Elder Lisa has stuck to her position of never sending kids e-transfer. Elder Lisa is the aunt who never gives us anything but toffees, no money. So we go to our favorite aunties, Aunties Messeret and then Lady Unique. They give us money all the time. So our hands are out, waiting for money for candy. Yes. Elder Messeret and Elder Lady Unique, Miss Angie Mack. Our favorite aunties. Auntie Lisa doesn't give us money. Yes.
Okay. You get $1, you get $1. Oh. Everyone gets $1 today. Yes. As your favorite auntie, I'm reminded of the leaves on the tree that remained. And as the story was shared to me, I become tormented with this feeling that the friend had shared, this hatred for oneself, this feedback from the pastor, which in many ways could reinforce this hatred for oneself. And I decide to fast, remembering that the different things that we often use to cope, whether it be alcohol or other vices that people may use, I decide to remove my vices and fast for 60 days. And on the 60th night, I awaken realizing that the visions, the whispers from Mother Nature, the showings from the Creator about what those leaves meant, it was all to remind us and to remind the friend that the things that the leaves that have dropped are those negative views that the world has put on people of African descent. It is the racism, the colonial structures that have been reinforced by centuries of torment that have plagued our peoples. But the leaves that remain are the true beauty that liberates us all. And I go to the friend, I share this revelation, and we sit under the tree, we look at each leaf, we name the beauty in our communities, we sing, we laugh, we cry, we dance, and the tree begins to show new leaves and begins to flourish and come back to the state it was always meant to be. And the friend shares that she finally sees the beauty that has always been there in who she is, her Blackness. And she knows now that her job is to pay it forward to the next person so that they see what she wasn't able to see.
Auntie Messeret said pay it forward because she's the rich auntie. So, so we take the doll and we find Shelley, Auntie Shelley and Lady Unique, Miss Angie Mack, and say, well, are you going to multiply this money for us, or are you going to take it from us and say we are going to keep it for you when you are 18? Auntie Shelley and Auntie Lady Unique, Angie Mack, we are waiting for you. Are you the grumpy aunties who would say anything to us because nobody offered you food? Or Fanta or Coca-Cola? Oh, Aunt Pauline just came from the States. She brought us Tic Tacs and candy. Aunt Pauline, how is your home? We are telling stories. Auntie Shelley, Auntie Mark are refusing to talk to us. So Aunt Pauline, how are you? Auntie Pauline, Auntie Pauline, Auntie Pauline, Auntie Pauline, yeah, Auntie Pauline. Hip hop song, Auntie Pauline. Yes. So Auntie Pauline hasn't rested just yet, so we won't disturb them too much. So ladies and gentlemen, wonderful people, our story has not ended. This is just the beginning. When we meet again, we re-establish community, establish faith in our Blackness, the beauty in our resilience, and we pay it forward because it is our duty to our forefathers. It is our duty to our forefathers. It is our duty to our children. It's our duty to our brothers and sisters. We are Black first and foremost. Beautiful. Extremely beautiful and yet. Yes. And then I leave you with the words of Kwame Nkrumah. On the day of independence in Ghana, 1957, 6th March, which is tomorrow actually. He said, the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation of Africa. You are because I am. I can never call myself Black if you don't stand with me. We can never be a strong people if we don't come together and support each other. Forget language, forget geographical location. Look at the Black. Let's move from there. Thank you very much. Yes, so yeah, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was amazing.
Aquaba.
Oh,
Hey, Auntie Aquaba. Yes, I love it.
Yeah, Anna.
oh.
Christiana May, do you either of you want to take the lead here and wrapping us up?
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Eric, for leading us through that beautiful storytelling session. And there's a lot of quotes in here, a lot.
Oh, yes. We can get a lot of money if we do this and write it in a book.
Right? We should come together, put our skills together, make some money, because we can get that e-transfer earlier, right?
Yes.
Yes, but thank you everyone for joining and sticking the day through us. We really appreciate you all joining us for our pre-virtual launch for Black Mental Health Week. Christiana will drop all the websites and social media again in the chat, but we have a week full of activities coming up. Tomorrow, we are officially launching Black Mental Health Week with an official virtual launch. I believe it's 2 p.m. Toronto time. And we have a panel tomorrow on cannabis education and wellness for Black youth at 4 p.m. Toronto time. We have lots of other programs, including wellness for infant and children, healthy co-parenting, microaggressions in the workplace. We also do have a showcase happening on Saturday, so please follow the social media and the events closely. But again, I thank you all for joining us today for our pre-virtual launch. Christiana, did you want to add anything?
This was amazing. This was really great. I just wanted to add that, you know, we are here because, what is it? I am because we are. I love that quote and that proverb.
That's Ubuntu. Yes.
Ubuntu, exactly. So, this has been such a beautiful and just such a precious time to connect with you all. And I'm just excited for the rest of the events. I know it's going to be just as beautiful as this. And I'm excited for you all to tune in as well. I'm just going to leave a feedback survey for the events that took place today. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out. And yeah, thank you again. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Hopefully we'll see you again on Zoom some other time this week.
Yes, cheers.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yes, have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you for coming. Oh, lovely.
We got our
Thank
camera.
you. I love the head tie. Good to see you. Take care.
Bye. Bye, Mary.
Bye, Mary.
Okay, I just put her in the waiting room again.